Welcome to Making It with Terry Woolman, the show that explores the secrets, successes, and strategies for making it in the music biz. And now, here's your host, Terry Woolman.
Hello, Firesiders, and welcome to Adventures by the Book, where our mission is to connect people and communities through the superpower of books. I'm your host, Susan Macbeth, and I'm especially excited today because not only do we have an amazing guest, Ryan Dusick, founding drummer of the world-renowned band Maroon 5, who will be talking about his new memoir.
Is that Ryan Dusick?
Harder to Breathe,
Yeah.
A memoir of making Maroon 5, losing it all and finding recovery. But I also have a super co-host with whom you have probably seen on his own fireside show, Making It with Terry Woolman. We have lots to unpack with this book, and I knew that Terry would add so much insight, not only from his perspective as a musician, but also as a compassionate soul. So I'm really looking forward to our chat today. So my co-host, Terry Woolman, is no stranger to music or to fireside. World-renowned jazz musician Terry Woolman brings his talent and passion to every recording and performance. And I can personally attest to that because we've hosted a few events together, and he is compassionate and passionate, which is probably one of the many reasons that he's built a solid reputation as an in-demand music director, guitarist, producer, composer, who has worked with an impressive array of world-renowned musicians. He also hosts weekly podcasts right here on Fireside on his own show, Making It with Terry Woolman, which explores the secrets, successes, and strategies for making it in the music biz. Welcome, Terry.
Thank you. Great to be here. And hi, Ryan. Great to meet you.
Nice to meet you, Terry.
And our guest author today is an associate marriage and family therapist who just happens to have been the founding drummer for the world-renowned band Maroon 5 until his life went from aspiring pop star with anxiety to heartbroken alcoholic to thriving mental health survivor and messenger of hope and recovery. And Ryan, I think we could all use some hope right now. So welcome, Ryan.
Thank you so much for having me on this show.
Yeah, we're glad you're here. And Terry, I wanted to start with you because you mentioned when we spoke the other day that there was a particular passage in Ryan's book that resonated with you, and you had wanted Ryan to lead by reading that. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
I do. And I also want to dedicate this show, our conversation today, in the same way, Ryan, that you dedicated your book, which is this book and this show is dedicated to the young people of all ages struggling with mental health challenges. So, and it's a beautifully written book. I actually really enjoyed it. It was difficult to read at times, feeling your struggle because you express it with such clarity and such honesty. So, I felt right along. I mean, clearly I relate to you as a musician. We both have toured and recorded and I want to pull back the curtain a little bit about what that's really like today in our conversation as well. But there were many things that you wrote, but the two things that I'd love for you to read if you're ready to do that. You had talked about earlier in the book, there was a survivor's note that you just talked about being one of the very lucky ones, because you were able to reach out for help. But you also spoke about, I'd like you to set it up with the other paragraph, which is about just imagine that you've been working towards something since the age of 16. I think it really sets the intention and lays the foundation for this conversation.
Yeah, well, thank you for picking these passages to set things up today. This first passage, I believe, is from my prologue. Just imagine, you've been working towards something since the age of 16, dreaming the biggest dreams you can envision with your high school bandmates, struggling and striving for a decade. And you finally reach the mountaintop, where you can see all that work rewarded, but then you teeter on the summit, trying to not fall down the other side of the mountain. And then from the survivor's note at the beginning of the book, this is a passage from that intro. I am one of the very lucky ones because I finally reached out for help, possessed the resources to obtain it, and eventually found the program of recovery I so badly needed. In doing so, I was awakened to a whole new life I could have never imagined possible. When those of us who have overcome obstacles tell our stories of survival, we not only work to reduce the stigma attached to seeking help, we also instill the hope that change is possible, offering solutions that may not have been apparent to those still suffering.
That really set the tone for me when I started reading your book. It brought me right into your story, both as an artist, you being an artist, but also you being a therapist, and the journey that led from, from being a ball player, growing up as a kid and athletic and then moving into having a band, with your best friends and really, like you say, finally reaching the mountaintop, which most people do not. Um, and this feeling, you talk about it at various places in the book, about feeling this loss of control or, this idea of now what? You hit that, and it's not always like it would seem, certainly in every area of life. But can we just dive into the deep end of the pool right now? I want to
Sure.
quote something that you had written about, and let's just start talking about it so people really get the gist of the story, which is, you said, in the years after I left Maroon 5, the pain of having lost my identity led to a depression unlike anything I've ever felt in my life. The depression led to alcoholism, and the alcoholism led to a pretty severe anxiety disorder. This was not the life I had thought I would live when we first embarked on our incredible journey as a band. Even worse, I just couldn't imagine how any of this was going to end. I really thought that I'd gotten my shot at ultimate happiness, and I had lost it. How the hell could I go on from that? That's a lot, Ryan.
That's a lot, and I would like to back up just even a little bit from that, because before he even reaches that, we think of kids who struggle with, alcoholism or drug abuse or issues that, they've come from really challenging family backgrounds or struggles. And Brian, take us back to your childhood, because you had a nice family. You excelled at school. In fact, you excelled at everything you did. You were an exceptional baseball player. And it wasn't really until you transitioned over to middle school that you started struggling. And I'd like to talk a little bit about your childhood and what it was like for you growing up. Just like before music came into, before fame came into it, before alcoholism came into it. Who was Ryan Dusick as a child, and what was your life like?
Well, I think that I was incredibly blessed, and I'm very grateful for the my roots. Really, because my parents are wonderful people. I had an older brother as well who was very supportive of me and very sweet, and just a big loving family. That I think when you have that kind of support as a child, it gives you resilience. You have that to fall back on in terms of knowing that you have some value. You've been instilled with that growing up. So, that was just really a wonderful thing. But that being said, my family has had its traumas, like any family. My mom always says, we all have our stuff. Right. And we're no exception. And both of my parents have had their issues in the back of their life, their lives. They had their own traumas and stuff that have informed who they are as adults. And so some of that gets passed down. You deal with certain things that's intergenerational trauma. I think that as a kid, I didn't get the sense that there was anything wrong. I think I was a happy kid. In a lot of ways, I look at my childhood as being relatively innocent, maybe a little sheltered, maybe a little bit coddled, even just in terms of this very insulated world that I lived in a elementary school where my parents were very involved with the parent-teacher conferences and all that stuff, and a good group of friends. But I was very shy. I was a shy kid, and I was very much sort of a mama's boy, very much just wanting to. I had my parents' approval, but I think that early on I probably maybe had that Pavlovian response of like when I would achieve, I would get a lot of positive reinforcement for it, and so I guess that's not Pavlovian. That's operant conditioning, as we say. Um, but I think that just kind of instilled in me this desire to want to be great at everything I did, as you alluded to. I wanted to excel. And that was really, I think at an early age, my identity was that I was somebody who excelled at everything that I applied myself to. I was not a particularly outgoing, extroverted kid. I was pretty introverted and shy. But I did well in school, and I did well on the baseball field. And I had a good group of friends that were a close-knit circle. And I really didn't have any real struggles that built that kind of resilience early on in my life, where I had to pick myself up after falling down, so to speak. Until, as you said, when I was in middle school or high school, when I had some of my first failures and disappointments that were quite alarming for me at that point, because I was so used to everything sort of going my way up until that point.
You had also mentioned in the book that you grew up in a generation where everybody received a trophy, whether you played well or you didn't. And I was curious, especially since you're a therapist now, how did that play into forming you or not preparing you for the great challenges that would come as an adult, that come in anybody's life as an adult?
Yeah, it's interesting. I didn't know any different. I didn't know that wasn't the way it always was, that everyone got a trophy. And I suppose it was actually right at the beginning of when that was the case. I was born in '77, so it must have been the early '80s when I got my first trophies. And I guess that was the new idea. And now I guess it's pretty normal. The generation that came after me, you hear a lot of that about the millennial generation, sort of, everyone is a special little flower. But I very much was a part of that as well, even being of the previous generation. I think, I don't know, because obviously I still had the drive to excel at baseball. I still
And music.
and music, so I don't know if how much of an effect that had, but I do think that in a lot of ways it instilled this feeling that that I was special, that I was that everything I did was going to be applauded to some extent, and up until a certain point, like I said, it was. And so when it wasn't at a certain point, when there was a setback, it was just alarming. It's like, what is this? It was very foreign.
Yeah, I can see where that would be the case, especially because you were so talented at everything you did. I mean, you became interested in music when your older brother taught himself to play guitar and joined a band, and you decided to become a drummer and teach yourself as well, which I just find remarkable. You emulated accomplished drummers, but you were in particularly drawn to Stuart Copeland of the Police. And I'm curious, what was it about him? I want to talk about your first foray into music at that young, tender age, but also what it is about Stuart Copeland and some of the other musicians that captured your admiration. And you mentioned in your book too, one more part of that question is that to you, drums represented freedom. And I found that very interesting, and I'd love to hear about that too.
I think the two go hand in hand. I think that, my relationship with the drums and what they represented to me has a lot to do with why Stuart Copeland became my first drumming hero. To me, he was a rebellious kind of drummer. He had all these chops that were jazz or influenced by, different world beats and different kinds of influences, and he could play all of that really well. And then he started this like punk band, basically, or new wave band, and wanted to play really hard and really fast, but then turn it on its head by like turning the beat around and throwing in reggae beats and Latin influences and African rhythms. And so to me, it was like I was bored by the idea of just playing along to a track and just playing four on the floor and counting 1, 2, 3, 4. Like that didn't interest me at all. As much as I wanted to make a lot of noise and thump and tear the roof off the place, I wanted to do something that you didn't expect. That was what I loved about Stuart Copeland. It was like everything he did, you were just waiting to hear what he was going to do next because it was so unpredictable and so unique. And that was kind of, I think, my rebellious spirit coming out, I think, to a certain extent. As much as I was, the mama's boy who wanted to please my parents and do everything, I was a very responsible kid. I think when I hit my teen years and the drums became the sort of the symbol of my freedom and my, rebellion in terms of defying expectations of what I might do with my life and who I am. I think I wanted to teach myself to play the drums because I wanted to blaze my own path. I didn't want to hear what somebody else wanted me to do. I wanted to do it my way. And in some ways that was great. I think that really lent itself to being unique and to doing something outside of the box. But in other ways, I think I skipped over some of the important education about the fundamentals.
Well, you were actually on your way to becoming quite an accomplished baseball player when you were injured. And I'd like you to talk a little bit about how that affected you physically, yes, but emotionally as well. And is that fall what led to your focus more on drumming? So, I find it very interesting that you were going to become this really accomplished baseball player, and oh, you're hurt, so I just turn and become an incredible musician, and oh, you have a fall from music, and oh, I'm going to become this incredible therapist and help the world. And every step of your journey has been inspirational and has taken courage, has been difficult. But can you talk about a little bit kind of about the end of your baseball career, at least more in a professional sense?
Sure. Well, thank you for all those kind words. My ego is getting big over here.
Deserved.
Well, baseball, what happened with my baseball career, if you want to call it that, kind of parallels what happened later with my drumming career. And that's, part of the reason why I put it in the book, because it really was my first passion and it was my first identity of sorts. As a young man, it was the thing that I excelled at most when I was 12 years old. And it was the place where I felt most comfortable on the pitching mound. And, as a shy kid, for whatever reason, when I was pitching, I felt in total control. I felt like I could put the ball exactly where I wanted to, and I could, strike anyone out that was facing me. And that was a powerful feeling. It was something that lent, a lot to my confidence. And I had visions of going on someday to pitching for the Dodgers in the major leagues. And I think that looking back now, if I hadn't gotten injured, pitching in college or something like that might have been realistic because I was pretty good. But in high school, things kind of shifted. It started when I was about 13. I broke my hand and I kind of came back from that injury a little bit too fast and was pitching at the full length distance, the senior league, which is the major league distance, at age 14. For the first time, just having had a cast off. And I ended up having some elbow pain for the first time in a tournament at that point, an all-star tournament. And I pitched through it. I made the mistake of not speaking up and saying, I need to take a break. I didn't want to let anyone down. I didn't want to let my teammates down. I didn't want to let my parents down. I didn't want to let myself down. I thought if I just pray it away and just knuckle down and bear it, that I could get through it. And it went from a bad situation to a worse one because now I had tendonitis in my shoulder and I was trying to come back from it and the ball just wasn't coming out of my hand the right way. And it was very frustrating and diminishing of my confidence because this was the place where I had the most self-esteem. And now I felt like I didn't have any control over it. And it was a really strange thing that happened because on top of the pain and trying to work my way through it or back from injury, there was also this feeling that my coordination was breaking down, but the mechanics were breaking down, that the ball just wasn't coming out right. And no matter how hard I sort of tried to do it the way I used to do it, there seemed to be an inverse relationship between the effort and the outcome. And it was just so demoralizing to go through that over and over again to the point where it just wasn't fun anymore. And the experience of pitching for the varsity team, for a lot of reasons, was not a fulfilling one. And music entered my life around that time. It was, I mean, in a big way, in terms of it was the early '90s. It was the era of grunge rock, and Nirvana came out, and that really spoke to me. And my favorite bands were like Soundgarden and Rage Against the Machine and Tool. These very heavy bands that, to me, were saying something that just communicated to me in a way that nothing else had, and I felt heard and understood in their music. And I kind of was going to a darker place, going inward, becoming more introspective, and feeling a little disillusioned in the ways that my what was once my passion and my identity was slipping away from me. So the music became my coping mechanism more and more, and pounding on the drums was my release. It was my freedom and my expression. And weirdly enough, you can play, psychologist, but for whatever reason, my arm didn't hurt when I was playing the drums.
Yeah, that's interesting. And I'm curious about the start of the band, because this is so unusual that you and literally your pimple-faced teenage friends were just hanging out through your shared passion of music, doing all the normal things that, hormone-ravaged teenage boys do, but also creating music. I find that really remarkable, especially that none of you really had exposure to music or experience with music. You're kind of self-taught, you're self-formed. Can you talk a little bit about how that transpired? As here you are, just these teenage friends, and all of a sudden one day we're going to say, hey, we're going to start a band and become world renowned. I mean, how does that happen?
Well, we really were a garage band in the truest sense. We started the band. I mean, the first time I played with Adam Levine was in my parents' garage when I was 12, and I just started playing the drums, and he just started playing some guitar. I didn't know he could sing at that point. And it was just really kids in the garage futzing around on the drums and the guitar without any real, vision of what that would be down the road. We started the band Cars Flowers in '94 when I was 16, and Adam had grown up a little bit at that point, but he was 14 still, and he was, as you said,
Hasn't Adam grown up yet?
not really, no. No, but he was, he was a precocious kid in some senses. He had this sort of innate musical talent that was very much a diamond in the rough at the time. But I recognized it in him. He had this voice and he had something. I guess you could say I discovered Adam Levine. I don't know if he would say that, but for me, it was just something I wanted to do it represented freedom, it represented rebellion, and I just wanted to make a lot of noise. And I saw a kindred spirit in Adam. He was somebody, we were on the same page in terms of the music we were listening to and what we were trying to do with it. And he had made friends with Jesse and Mickey in middle school, and we were all now in high school now together. And I was the sort of established veteran of the school pep band. And we were all pretty much self-taught at that point. I think our mutual friend Adam Salzman taught Adam Levine to play the guitar. Adam taught Jesse to play the guitar. I taught myself to play the drums. Mickey had played the drums first and then switched to the bass. And we just really learned to play together. I mean, the way that we formed, I think that's why we had a chemistry, other than just, us being friends and being like-minded in terms of our influences. I think we really learned to play together. We were just emulating our heroes and like kind of pushing and pulling off of each other in my parents' garage, like learning what works and what doesn't work by trial and error.
Which is not atypical of a lot of musicians. So many of us came up with the very simple idea of literally being in a garage band, playing together in the garage with your friends. And it grows from that point. Some people go on to study formally. Ryan, you did not, which for a good part of your career did not hold you back in any way. And then at some point, your lack of technical training, formal training, basically came into part of your story, part of your challenges, but which is not uncommon either for an athlete, certainly. And people, as they get older, as they age or they have injuries, they train. A lot of everybody, a ballet dancer takes class, for their whole life.
Mm-hmm.
And there's reasons for that. And the same thing, a therapist, you're always going to be studying.
Right.
That's the beauty of life, continuing to learn. But I think it's great that you all came up together, just you after school, you go play. That's where so much great art and talent and dreams are born. And there was a quote in your book of Vin Scully, who really inspired you, and the words were, it was 1988, in a year that has been so improbable, the impossible has happened. And you wrote in your book that those words made you feel like anything was possible if you could dream of it.
Yeah, and Vince Scully was the voice of my childhood. I wanted him to be in there because the Dodgers were so important to me, and the '88 team was so important to me. There was this Cinderella team that no one believed would win the World Series, and here, Vince Scully just knew how to capture a moment, and he was a poet in a lot of ways. And I just remember being really moved by that moment and by that team and by him and the way that he captured it. And it echoes, I bring that quote back later at the end of the book. I don't want to ruin it for anyone who hasn't gone there yet. But, I put it in there for a couple of reasons, because I did want that payoff, because there have been several moments in my life where things have happened that wouldn't have happened had I not believed it would happen, and you have to have that belief. And there was also a moment in my life when I didn't believe, when I had lost my hope and I had lost faith that things would turn out well. And that was a really dark time in my life. And so, having gotten through that time and gotten to this better place in my life and having all of the things that I've learned to offer, I just look back on that moment from Vince Scully in my childhood as just like one of those rare moments where something comes to you and it means a lot in terms of inspiration and motivation, to be hopeful, to think of what is possible instead of what is impossible.
Can you go back to sixth grade? I want to backtrack a little bit, and then I really want to get to some of the touring stories, because I think they're important. They're interesting for people to hear, but I think they're really important for people to really understand what that life is like. That's led you to this conversation today and this book and your beautiful life and family that you've created. In sixth grade, you were asked to give a speech because you're the class president, and as Susan had said, overachiever and great at everything that you did. And you had, as you said, your first bout with anxiety, which is not uncommon. I was shy too. So many performers, actually, I'm laughing as you were talking about being shy. I was really shy too, but I know a lot of entertainers, performing artists, who were shy and actually still are shy, in smaller situations. But in sixth grade, like this really was like your first real devastating moment of experiencing anxiety. And I wanted to just ask you, I guess the question is, I know you refer back to it, when you started really experiencing it as an adult, brought on by physical injury and limitation and being able to do your job and do it at the level that you were used to doing it. But what was there some kind of inclination that your moment of anxiety as a sixth grader was any different? Did it feel profoundly, especially since you're a therapist right now, was it like a sixth grader moment of anxiety, or was it sort of a premonition of what was really to come later in your life?
Looking back, I think it was not terribly unique. I think most, 11 or 12-year-olds or whatever I was at that age, going out on stage in front of hundreds of people for the first time with a piece of just paper in your hand and a microphone, most people would be anxious. Most people's hands would start to shake. And it wasn't devastating. I mean, I got through it. I probably got through it 4 times as fast as I probably should have. Just like, and it wasn't like a terrible, devastating moment, but but it was just sort of like a premonition, because looking back on it now, I recognize that it was the fixation on the negative that made it worse, right? We talk a lot about visualization or about imagining something going well and then it going well. Well, the opposite can be true. If you fixate on something, something's going to turn out bad, or you project all these negative outcomes. Sometimes that can manifest. It could be a self-fulfilling prophecy, right? And it was interesting to me, just like looking back on that it was when I started to notice that my hands were shaking and paying a lot of attention to that and fixating on that it started to get worse, right? As opposed to, oh, this is something that happens. Everyone gets nervous. Everyone gets a little shaky when they're nervous, and accepting it and moving forward. I've learned how to do that at this point in my life, but I didn't necessarily have those skills yet.
Well, we'll talk about anxiety producing. I want to talk a little bit about the moment that you left the band, because right as they were achieving their pinnacle of fame, I know that Adam Levine wrote the foreword to your book. And what he said, and part of it is, Ryan assumed the role of the adult in the band. He was the parent we needed in a good way. He made sure we bathed and didn't get in too much trouble. So you're best friends. You're in this world-renowned band. You've achieved this height of success. And then your best friend has to literally fire you from the band, which I can imagine was excruciating for both of you. Can you talk a little bit about that experience? And I was happy to see that he wrote the foreword in the book to know that you're still friends. That just brought me so much gratitude as a mom, as a human being. But I wanted you to share that moment, what it felt like then, what it meant to you then, and how you process that now in hindsight.
Yeah, well, I put that, that scene that you're referring to, I made that the first chapter of the book, the prologue, for a reason. That was a really pivotal moment in my life. And in a lot of ways, for a long time, I looked at it as, everything that came before and everything that came after that moment, And in some ways, I wanted that to be a cliffhanger, because it's like, I wanted to treat it like it was a murder mystery. Like, here's the scene of the crime. Here's where the person gets killed. How the heck did it get to that? How did we come to that? And then where does it go from there? Like, so I thought that just as a narrative device was clever. but
It does work.
But also, it was just because I was writing this book as a sort of narrative therapy for myself, a way of reframing the way I had been looking at my life in a way that was going to be useful for me going forward. I wanted to really, really just go to a vulnerable place in terms of how devastating that moment was, and everything that was the reasons why that moment was so devastating, and the reasons why everything after it was so difficult. And it wasn't something that I didn't see coming. This was something that was a year and a half in the making, and if anything, I had many premonitions of that moment. I had foreseen it, and I even debated, did I will this to happen? Was I focusing on the negative so much and imagining how things are going to end badly for me that it was a self-fulfilling prophecy? And in some ways, that was like, it made it even worse for me, because I was like, I'm my own worst enemy. I poisoned my own success, self-sabotage, right? I don't know. It's complicated to what extent it was that. I think there were genuine physical issues that led to it as well. But it was complicated for so many reasons, because, as you said, these were my best friends. These were people that I had spent 12 years at that point building something from the ground up with, from a garage band to the biggest arenas all over the world. And just as we were reaching that summit, they were basically saying to me, we need to walk on without you. And it was not just the end of this career, this wonderful career that we had built. It was the end of a friendship. It was the end of my identity. everything that was my self-definition in terms of creativity and music and the relationship with these guys, personally and creatively, my entire social sphere, everyone that was surrounding the band. So in that moment, I felt like I was losing everything that defined me. And I felt that the person that probably had been the most important person in my life up until that point, the person that I had met and discovered in some ways, and who had embraced me, and we had built something together, and we had been like creative soulmates in that regard, was telling me that it was no longer going to be that way, and that they were going to be doing it without me. So it was, I mean, I really crawled into a shell after that in some ways, and I felt really defeated. I felt like, my self-esteem was completely diminished. I just didn't have a self-concept. I didn't know what moving forward looked like. I didn't have the coping skills to deal with it. I don't know if anyone does, to be honest.
I don't think so.
It was grief. It was grief I had to deal with.
Ryan, let's give this a little context for everybody, including Susan, because I do want to pull back the curtain right now a little bit on describing what it really takes for a band to have the major success that you guys collectively achieved. There's constant travel. You talk about it in the book. And certainly I related because I've toured and know what that's like. It is not glamorous, that part of it. The hour and a half on stage is, that's what we live for. But constant travel, lack of sleep, strain on your personal and family relationships. You're doing morning interviews, radio interviews. You're doing after show meals with the radio and marketing people when you really need to just try to get more than 4 hours of sleep a night. But that's part of what you do to achieve the success. Never mind all the years of developing your talent and your skill as a musician and keeping that up. You're navigating through excessive exposure to extreme amounts of money, alcohol, drugs, sex, trying to figure it out in a balanced way. And it's something else that most people have never experienced. There's a really unnatural, constant surge of adrenaline that your body produces when you perform in front of thousands of people, and you become the focus that's required to do that. But also that level of attention is not natural. It's really thrilling. It can be overwhelming, terrifying. It is everything. And because you lived it at the top of the mountain. And I've had those experiences as well. And you're playing on TV and you're doing all these things. But how could it not affect you? And then you add a physical. I think I want to let you off the hook a little bit. It's like I want people to really understand that even without a physical injury that was very real, it's still remarkable that anybody can maneuver through all of that and not have mental health issues or any kind of addiction issues or self-esteem issues, or how could that not happen?
Right. Yeah, I do think that's true. And for whatever reason, some people are maybe more well suited to that lifestyle than others.
Yeah.
But even those people, sometimes end up with problems or just are in denial of the issues they're having for a long time because they've just kind of leaned into a lifestyle, and embraced it. And a lot of things have been put on the back burner as a result. For me, it was very tangible. It was like I was a homebody. I was somebody that, I had a small group of friends and a girlfriend, and I really didn't. The idea of the circus life and things changing all the time and being in a different city every day and the level of stimulation that goes along with that, that didn't appeal to me at all, even before we started.
Right.
Touring was not something I dreamed about, really. I dreamed about, being a rock star in the sense of people buying our records and being like my heroes, in that somebody's going to appreciate what we do the way that I did, Pearl Jam or Soundgarden or some of those bands, and so the extent to which we were going to be on the road for years and be living that lifestyle in that way, it was something I was willing to sign up for as part of the gig, but it wasn't something I was looking forward to. But when we got to, I mean, the first experience we had with it in '97, I was pretty miserable. I was homesick the entire time. I was tired. I really didn't enjoy it much. So when we went back out in 2002 on Songs About Jane, I tried to take a very different attitude. And maybe this is more of what I was just describing in terms of a different personality. I tried to lean into it. I tried to say to myself, I'm just going to enjoy the hell out of this. When there's a moment to have fun, I'm going to have fun. When there's a city to see, I'm going to go see it. And I want to meet all the people. When we play in a college town, I want to go to the college party, and I want to live this up. And every time that a radio station wants to take us out for drinks, and every time they offer to, the record label wants to buy us dinner, I'm going to be gracious and I'm going to be happy about it. And if it means I'm going to get 4 hours of sleep and be hungover playing an acoustic show, at 10 a.m. the next morning, then so be it. And it worked. The power of positive thought worked for a while. I'd say for about a year and a half. This was at the age of like 25, where I was young enough that I could kind of fake it in terms of the level of energy that I had going for me. But it got more and more exhausting, and these things took more and more of a toll on me physically and mentally. And it started to become, at a certain point, like, when is that break going to come? Like, when are we going to have a moment that I can recharge my batteries, after all of this? And I didn't want to seem ungrateful, I didn't want to be lack graciousness for all the opportunities that were being offered us. And we were told over and over again, by our record label and by people we admired that had done it before us, like, you have to say yes to everything on your first hit. And we hadn't even had a hit yet at that point. We were building towards our first hit. And once we had a hit 2 years in, it was even more demanding. And, we just kept hearing the same thing over and over again. If you say no, those people aren't going to ask again. So you have to say yes, and you have to do all the things you described. And I'm glad that you mentioned, just the level of adrenaline that's involved.
Right.
That was something I noticed even before we toured. I don't remember having stage fright really, because I was just so excited to play on stage in LA, playing on stage at the Whiskey or the Roxy or the Troubadour. And so much so that my adrenaline was pumping all day. And I remember oftentimes by the time I would get on stage, I was already exhausted,
I understand.
And I think that played a part in it, just in terms of my constitution on the road. It's like, I remember there being moments when we had just played a big gig and we'd played on TV or we'd done something. And then we flew back to LA from New York. And I was still just running on fumes of adrenaline. And then we got to LA and they told us, hey, you just got Letterman and you need to get back on a plane and fly back to New York and do it tomorrow night. And I was like, oh my God. And then another rush of adrenaline. And by the time you get back to New York and then you're on stage at the Ed Sullivan Theater, just really running on fumes. And you can only do that for so long, the amount of adrenaline pumping constantly, as fun as it is and as exhilarating as it is, your constitution can only take so much.
It's a lot.
Yeah. Yeah. And what was it like for you once the band was not part of your life anymore? I mean, here you are with this touring with this world-renowned band. You're the big part of its success, the founding drummer, the inspiration, and then that's no longer part of your life. How long was that journey to pivot to what you're doing now, your marriage and family therapy? Did you just wake up one day and said, hey man, I can use this experience I've had and really help people? Or was it a journey that you considered other things?
I didn't really consider, well, I guess I did consider other things, but it was a journey. And it was a little bit of both of what you described in terms of when I left the band, my first thought was I'm still going to do something in music. And I did do a little bit of producing and I did some songwriting. I even managed the band for a while. But it was really rough because, like I said earlier, I had felt like I had found my real musical soulmates. And the experience that I had with the band, beyond just the success that we eventually had and the fame and all that comes with it, what I missed most was how magical that connection was and how fulfilling it was for us to create something together. And the moments that I missed most were just, when something was really gelling and we were working on an arrangement and it came together and it was like magic. And like, I didn't realize how rare that was, you know? And not that some of the experiences that I had after the band, working with other bands and other musicians, weren't fulfilling and weren't enjoyable. But everything. I was comparing everything to that previous experience. I was comparing it to how magical it had been for me, how much I was invested in it, how much it was a part of my identity, and then of course the amount of success that we had, and the amount of success that they were still having. So anything that I did in music was fraught with this complicated relationship that I had with it. And as I got deeper into my drinking and some of the other issues I was having with anxiety and depression, it got harder and harder for me to motivate and to feel inspired to work in that realm. It was recovery from addiction. It was recovery from alcoholism and anxiety disorder that led to my new passion and my new direction in life. And I could not have seen that. I could not have foreseen that. It was something that only happened because of the journey that I was on and because I was putting one foot in front of the other, and that led me to that path. When I was in early recovery, I was just doing whatever I was told would be helpful for me to stay sober and to find a new life in sobriety, because I'd been so humbled by the ways in which I'd suffered and tried to control it myself and failed, that I knew that I had to really surrender to another way. And I was just really doing everything that was offered to me that was helpful. And one of those things was being of service. Being of service was a way to get out of yourself addiction is a disease of self-obsession. It's like everything you're feeling and thinking and everything you're going through is more important than anything else. How am I feeling at this moment? My first sponsor described it as, I think you tend to take your temperature a lot. It's like, how am I feeling right now? Am I feeling okay? What do I do about it? Should I change it in some way? And it's like, the answer is no. You have to sit in it. And then if you want to get out of it by being helpful to another human being, offering yourself in some way. And that was really helpful to me. So I started doing it just to be helpful to me. It was for personal reasons, and it was driven by my own recovery. But then I found that I had purpose in doing it, and I found it fulfilling. And I was volunteering at a recovery center a couple times a week, going in and co-leading groups and giving peer support. And the other thing that was interesting that happened was that I discovered I had some talents that I either didn't know I had or I had forgotten I had. Focusing so much on my identity as a musician, I had forgotten I was a pretty smart guy and that I could articulate ideas in a thoughtful way, and that I was a compassionate person, that I was able to sit with another human being and listen to them and offer them empathy. And so I was getting really good feedback, which was helpful for my self-esteem, which had been so beaten down. And so the combination of those elements, feeling this new sense of direction and purpose, feeling that I had some confidence again and self-esteem, and then feeling this fulfillment that came from being helpful to others, it was a light went on moment at a certain point. It was like, oh my God, I should be doing this for a living. This should be my career. I should be doing this at a higher level with an education to back it up. And so when I woke up one day and had that realization, it was like, that's a no-brainer. And there was no hesitation in it. It was like I was on my computer figuring out how I was going to apply to a graduate program to get a master's degree and become a therapist. And I was on my way. The next month I was enrolled at Pepperdine and on my way to get my master's in clinical psychology. And within 2 years, I had clients. I was seeing people during the pandemic on Zoom, and that was my first foray into being a therapist. And here I am now. I'm an associate marriage and family therapist. I work at a clinic. I have my own practice that I'm building, and I have a book out about mental health. So
there you go.
Yes, I was going to say, and you're a published author. We're
Right.
talking about with Ryan Dusick, founding drummer of Maroon 5, and his book, Harder to Breathe, a memoir. And do you think that this book represents an extension of that wanting to give back? I mean, what does this book mean to you? Because for us readers, I know Terry and I talked about that. It is difficult to read at parts. It's heart-wrenching, but it's also so courageous and inspiring. And I was curious, when you were writing, what message you wanted readers to take away from it.
Well, thank you. And, I really attempted in writing it to be as honest and vulnerable as possible. I think that I wrote the first draft, and the mission was essentially I wanted to tell my story in a really straightforward way. I was in grad school at the time when I started writing it, and I had the sort of the idea to almost make it like a case study about myself, because I was having to do a lot of self-reflection papers, and we were doing these case conceptualizations about potential clients in theory. And then I realized, you know what? It'll be a lot more helpful to people if I just really talk to them the way that I would if I were telling my story in an AA meeting or at a recovery center, and just relate to people as a human being, and not go into psychobabble too much or self analysis. Really just describe the feelings, really just describe exactly what the experience was, knowing that it was going to be fun and inspiring at times. It was going to be brutal and devastating and heartbreaking at times. And as I got into the second draft, and I really allowed myself to go there in those ways, and I found that I was reliving it in some ways. And when I was writing about the early years of the band, I was having fun, and I was feeling inspired and creative and uplifted. And then when I was talking about the years when I was starting to struggle, I was getting anxious and I was getting uncomfortable. And then when I was talking about my, the grief of losing that career, and the depression and the anxiety and the addiction, I was feeling like I was in a really dark place going back. And when I realized that I was having those emotions, I was going through that journey as I was writing it, that there was a good chance that the reader would have those feelings too. And I knew that in order to have the emotional payoff that I wanted it to have, which ultimately that was the goal, for people to feel hope at the end, to feel that the fact that I was able to get through that time in my life and find a lighter side of my being again, and find new direction and purpose and meaning and fulfillment, and just peace and serenity. If I was able to get there after all of that, that hopefully the reader would feel that just as deeply as they had the painful stuff, and it would inspire them in some ways, the ways that I had been inspired. So that was my intent. It gratifies me to hear that you had that experience with it. And it is uncomfortable at times. There are moments when I think it's probably hard to read, but it's worthwhile, hopefully.
It's absolutely worthwhile. I want to jump in for just a quick moment. When I was reading your book, especially the second half, and you had talked about spiritual bankruptcy, which is a profound and very strong title, for something that you were experiencing. But one of the things that came to me was something that I've lived my life. There's these words that were title of a book that I read when I was in high school, and it's called Embrace Tiger, Return to Mountain. And basically you spoke about the same thing, which is, to me, you said, in general, I find myself moving towards the things that make me anxious rather than running away from them, as I had for so many years. I have learned that the only way to overcome the anxiety is to walk through it. That's always what that title meant to me. If I'm afraid of something, I want to move towards it, not resist it. You've done a really beautiful job, not only of doing that, but describing it in your book, and the payoff for you having the courage to do that is profound.
Thank you. It was something that just kind of occurred to me one day, because I spent so much time in my addiction, and addiction is essentially that. It's a way of escaping or avoiding something that's uncomfortable and pushing it away. And then, of course, it comes back 10 times stronger because it's just under the surface stewing. And during my years, while I thought I was self-medicating, and efficiently self-medicating my anxiety, I was actually making it worse. And it was when I, did the hardest thing, that there is to do, which is to surrender and ask for help, and really just start that journey, which is terrifying at first. I mean, it's absolutely terrifying to say, I don't have control over this thing. And I need somebody to give me some new direction. I found pretty early on that in walking through that, in walking into what was terrifying, even just walking into, the groups at Betty Ford, into the theater where we had, just all the people and the social anxiety that went with that. And then at a certain point, at them asking me to get up in front of them and read from the big book of AA. I mean, from where I had been having panic attacks every single day of my life, that seemed like an impossible undertaking. Like I would just pass out, and and I did it, and it was overwhelming and it was terrifying in that moment in my life. But I got through it, and something occurred to me shortly thereafter as I started to do that day after day was that when I did things like that, they weren't quite as terrifying the next time. They were a little bit easier, and then I started speaking in groups, and I started, putting myself in positions where not only was it fulfilling because of the purpose of what I was doing, but I was realizing every time I'm doing this, I'm gaining more confidence. The anxiety is getting less. And then it just kind of like hit me like a ton of bricks. Like, I want to do more things like this. I want to seek out things that put me in positions where I'm being challenged, because that's where I'm going to grow. We grow in discomfort. And part of going back to school was that, as much as it was me getting an education and becoming a therapist, it was, I want to be in front of a classroom having to talk about psychology. The nightmare that everyone has after they leave high school for years, being up in front of class and feeling naked and having to lecture something you don't know anything about. It was like, I want to put myself there and have to do that, because then I'm going to overcome it, and then I'm going to get good at it, and then I'm going to feel so much more empowered by it. And so it's just sort of been one thing after another for me, where it was like putting a book out into the world and facing scrutiny. Yeah, I want to do that. Yeah, I want to see what happens when I do that. Stepping out onto a stage again, but this time in front of a microphone, not behind a drum set, and talking to people that I don't know, and trying to offer something hopeful. It's like, yeah, that sounds terrifying. I want to do that.
Sign me up.
I'm glad
Right.
you have. And we could talk to you all night long. I wish we could, but we're running out of time. And I did want to leave it open for audience Q&A for a few minutes, in case anybody wants to chat with Ryan Dusick, just to say hello, to share your own experience, to ask a question of him. You can invite yourself up on stage. And for those of you who don't know how to do that, you just go to the little round circle at the bottom of your screen and invite yourself to talk. And I see that Chris has a question for you. Welcome, Chris. Thanks for joining us.
Hi,
Did you have
Chris.
a question or comment for Ryan?
Yes, thank you so much. My name is Chris Rossetti in San Francisco. What a great interview. Not interview, what a great time together. So much knowledge and wealth being shared here. We appreciate everything, Ryan. And Terry and Susan, it's been amazing. And it's been the perfect thing to do while I'm making homemade soup. Anyway,
There you go.
my question is, comment first is congratulations, congratulations, congratulations. I was set free from 30 years of depression, and my mission is to give people hope, plain and simple. So congratulations on what you're doing. My question is this. My son's a drummer, has been since birth, if you will. And I've always wondered, and I've always wanted to ask this question of drummers. Are you extremely coordinated or extremely uncoordinated? I can't figure it out. I know it's a silly question, but that's all I got. And I'm back to my soup. Thanks for your answer.
Thank you, Chris.
Thank you, Chris, for the kind words and for the question. I do think in some ways I was naturally coordinated. I don't think I would have been able to teach myself to play the drums if I hadn't been naturally coordinated. My mom tells a story from when I think I was probably about two or 3 years old tops, at my Uncle Gil and Aunt Jean. Oh, sorry, I got a little message here. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Yeah, at my Uncle Gil and Aunt Jean's wedding when I was 2 or 3 years old, and apparently I was on the dance floor without any prompting from anyone, just moving to the music. And of course, my mom was a little biased, but she was like, "You were right on the beat." And so I do think, to some extent, there was rhythm in my family. There was rhythm in my soul. So there was coordination, but I don't know if all drummers, have that. I've met, some drummers who had to try a lot harder or take lessons to get that. But I do think it is an instrument, probably more than others, that does require some natural coordination.
Yeah, thank you for that question, Chris, and thanks for joining us today and for the kind words. I know our time is about up, but last chance, if anybody has a pressing question, I did want to mention that if you're a fan of music, and I assume because you're here, you are, I encourage you to click on Terry's icon or Ryan's icon and follow them on Fireside so that anytime they're on Fireside, you'll get notification of it. Terry interviews world-renowned musicians every week on his show, Making It with Terry Woolman. I do the same with authors every week, Adventures by the Book. You can click on my icon and follow me as well. Ryan, where can people follow you on social media? Where do you want to be found?
Well, thank you. I have a website, ryandusick.com, and that's for my author and speaker stuff, as well as a therapist and coach. On social media, Instagram, at Ryan Michael Dusick is a good place to follow me, at Ryan_Michael_Dusick. And there's a lot of fun stuff on there. I post pictures and videos of the band from when I was in it back in the day, and new stuff and content that's mental health related as well as music, and anything that's going on with me will be there. And you can find me on Twitter and Facebook and LinkedIn, all that stuff as well.
Great. And you can also find Ryan in San Diego on February 16th with our Adventures by the Book event. Ryan and 20 authors will be there celebrating a fun day of Superbook. You can meet him in person, hear his story, get your books autographed. You can pre-order a book, order it now in the fortune cookie in the middle of your screen. Harder to Breathe. We will ship it to you. We can get it autographed for you and send it to you. And we thank you for being here, Ryan. And anything else, Terry, you wanted to add before we shut down?
I do. Ryan, I just wanted to say I'm so happy to also have read that you built yourself a studio that you use for creating music and also writing your book, and that you created a space for yourself to continue to live a creative, artistic life, and to do it in your therapy, to do it in your songwriting, to do it in your now as a writer, literary author. And I was just really pleased to see that you did that, and it's part of what I saw. I see your book as it's got a happy ending. I'm going to give the end away right now, or the current part of your life, which is that you've got a good life. You've had a great life. It's been filled with challenges, as most people's lives are. Some of yours have been more public and amplified in some of the ways that we talked about. Just being in the limelight and living that life, that exhausting, fatiguing life. But man, bravo to you. Just deep respect for everything that you've accomplished and continue to accomplish creatively and personally.
Ditto that.
Yeah.
And I could listen to Ryan all day long. I have so many questions for him that I want this to be a to be continued. I mean, I wanted to talk to your family, to your parents, to your older brother. I want to hear their perspectives of the whole journey. I want to hear from your bandmates, from Adam Levine. Actually, Terry, you should interview Adam and Ryan on your show. I'll come
Be
listen.
happy to.
I'll be first to sign up. I have so many more questions about it. But Ryan, thank you for being here. Your journey has been fraught with difficulty, challenges, but also hope and inspiration. And through your work now as a therapist, and also through your work as an author and your new book, Harder to Breathe, you're giving so many people hope and inspiration that they can take with them. And we're really proud of you for that. I know it's taken a lot of courage. And final words are yours.
Well, thank you both so much, and thank you everyone who's been watching this and listening. Susan, for this opportunity. This was really fun, really an interesting new platform. And Terry, thank you for I've read your bio. It's an impressive one. To be able to sit with a musician of your caliber and talk is always going to be fun.
Yeah, thank you. The feeling's mutual. I appreciate that.
Both of you, and for the thoughtful questions that you offered up today. It was helpful to be able to touch on some interesting and important topics. So thank you both for your time and for how this turned out.
Our pleasure.
Thank you, Ryan. Thank you, Terry. Always a pleasure. And thank you to our audience members, whether you were in our virtual live audience or listening in on our social media channels or public profile page. We appreciate your support. And until next time, what is your next adventure by the book? Bye, everybody. Thank you for coming.
Tune in again next week for another great episode of Making It with Terry Woolman.